The autumn park glowed golden in the late afternoon light. Victoria Walsh sat on her usual bench, watching families pass by with their children. At 32, she'd grown accustomed to this quiet ritual. Every day after her shift at the grocery store, she'd come here to remember. The park had been Catherine's favorite place. Victoria pulled her worn cardigan tighter against the cooling air. 3 years had passed since she'd worked as a private nurse, but some patients stayed with you forever. Catherine Morrison had been one of those rare souls who made even the hardest days feel meaningful. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hello?" Victoria looked down to find a little girl standing before her, maybe 4 years old, with blonde curls and a purple bow in her hair. She held a stuffed white rabbit, examining Victoria with serious blue eyes. "Well, hello there," Victoria said warmly, glancing around for parents. "What's your name?" "Sophie. What's yours?" "I'm Victoria," she smiled. "That's a lovely rabbit you have." Sophie held it up proudly. "This is Snowball. My mommy gave her to me before she went to heaven." Victoria's heart clenched. "I'm sure Snowball is very special then." "She is." "Mommy said Snowball would keep me safe." Sophie tilted her head, studying Victoria with that unnerving directness children possess. "You have sad eyes like Daddy?" Before Victoria could respond, she heard rapid footsteps and a man's voice calling, "Sophie! Sophie, don't run off like that!" A man in an expensive black suit hurried toward them, concern etched across his face. He was probably in his early 40s, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. When he reached them, relief flooded his features. "I'm so sorry," he said to Victoria, slightly out of breath. "She saw you sitting here and just took off." "Sophie, you can't run away from Daddy like that." "But I wanted to meet the nice lady," Sophie protested. "She has the same smile as Mommy in the pictures." The man froze, his eyes meeting Victoria's for the first time. Something flickered across his face, recognition or confusion, she couldn't tell which. "It's all right," Victoria said gently. "She wasn't bothering me. Still, I apologize." He placed a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. We should head home," but Sophie wasn't ready to leave. "Daddy, can she come to the park with us tomorrow? Please?" "Sophie, I'm sure this lady has her own plans." "Actually," Victoria heard herself say, "I come here most afternoons." "If you're here tomorrow, I'd be happy to say hello." Why had she said that? But looking at Sophie's hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The man hesitated, then extended his hand. "I'm Andrew Morrison." Victoria's breath caught. "Morrison." "Victoria Walsh," she managed, shaking his hand. She watched them walk away, Sophie turning back to wave at her. Victoria's mind raced. Morrison wasn't a common name, but it couldn't be the same family. Could it? That night, Victoria pulled out the small box she kept in her closet. Inside were a few photos from her nursing days, mementos from patients who'd touched her life. She found the one she was looking for. Catherine Morrison, sitting in the garden of her beautiful home. Smiling despite the illness ravaging her body, next to Catherine stood her husband, Andrew. Victoria's hand trembled. That little girl in the park was Catherine's daughter. The baby Catherine had fought so hard to meet, to hold, to know even for a brief time. The next afternoon, Victoria almost didn't go to the park. Seeing them again felt complicated, weighted with memories she'd carefully packed away. But something drew her back to that bench. Sophie spotted her immediately and came running, Andrew following at a more measured pace. "You came!" Sophie exclaimed, climbing onto the bench beside Victoria. "I told Daddy you would," Andrew approached with a cautious smile. "She's been talking about you all morning. I hope we're not imposing." "Not at all," Victoria said, though her heart was pounding. "I enjoy the company." They sat together, Sophie chattering about her preschool and showing Victoria how Snowball could do tricks. Andrew watched his daughter with a mixture of love and sorrow that Victoria recognized too well. After a while, Sophie ran off to chase leaves, staying within view but giving the adults a moment of quiet. "She doesn't usually take to strangers like this," Andrew said. "You must have made quite an impression." Victoria chose her words carefully. "She seems like a wonderful child." She mentioned her mother passed away. Andrew's expression tightened. 3 years ago, cancer, Sophie was just a baby. He paused. She knows her mother loved her, but she has so few memories. Sometimes I worry it's not enough. Love doesn't require memory to be real, Victoria said softly. It leaves impressions deeper than recollection. He looked at her curiously. That's a profound thing to say. Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. She should tell him. But the words felt too big, too complicated. Over the next week, they fell into a pattern. Victoria would come to the park and Sophie would find her, always with Andrew trailing behind. They'd talk about small things while Sophie played. Andrew began to relax around her, sharing stories about his work managing his late father's investment firm. The challenges of single parenthood, the ways grief ambushed you when you least expected it. Victoria listened, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. She could see Catherine in Sophie's expressions, hear her in the child's laugh. It was beautiful and painful all at once. One evening, Sophie fell asleep on the bench between them, exhausted from playing. Andrew gently stroked her hair. I need to tell you something, Victoria said quietly, before she could lose her courage. Andrew looked up, waiting. 3 years ago, I was a private nurse. I specialized in palliative care. She took a breath. I was your wife's nurse during her final months. The color drained from Andrew's face. What? Catherine Morrison. I cared for her from diagnosis until she passed. I was there the day Sophie was born, helped Catherine hold her even when she was too weak to lift her arms. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. I'm sorry I didn't tell you immediately. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me, or if bringing it up would cause more pain. Andrew stared at her, emotions cascading across his face. Shock, recognition, something that might have been anger or relief. I remember you, he said hoarsely. You were there at the end. You held Catherine's hand when I couldn't breathe, when I was falling apart. You told me it was okay to cry. I remember, Victoria whispered. Why didn't you say something? Because I didn't want to intrude on your life. I'm not your wife's nurse anymore. I'm just someone who sits in a park, remembering a patient who changed my life. Andrew's eyes filled with tears. Catherine talked about you. Near the end, when the pain medication made her confused, she'd ask for you. She said you made her feel safe. Victoria covered her mouth, sobbing now. She made me feel purposeful. After she died, I couldn't go back to nursing. I kept seeing her in every patient, and I couldn't do it anymore. I've been working at a grocery store ever since, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not helping people die with dignity. They sat in silence, Sophie sleeping peacefully between them. She loved this park, Andrew finally said. She'd come here even when she was too sick to walk far. She'd sit and imagine bringing Sophie here, teaching her to feed the ducks, pushing her on the swings. His voice broke. Is that why you come here? Because of her? Victoria nodded. I felt close to her here, like I could honor her memory by appreciating the beauty she never got to share with Sophie. Andrew reached across his sleeping daughter and took Victoria's hand. Thank you for caring for her then, for caring now even though you didn't have to. I wanted to, Victoria said. Catherine taught me that every moment matters, that love persists beyond death, that caring for someone in their darkest hour is sacred work. She would be so glad Sophie met you, Andrew said. She worried constantly about who would tell Sophie about her, who would help her understand the mother she lost. Over the following months, Victoria became a regular part of their lives. She'd join them at the park, then occasionally for dinner. She'd tell Sophie stories about her mother, carefully chosen memories that painted Catherine as brave and kind and full of love. Andrew watched these exchanges with gratitude and something deeper that neither of them named. One spring afternoon, with Sophie playing nearby, Andrew turned to Victoria. I need to ask you something, and please tell me if I'm overstepping. He took a breath. Would you consider being part of Sophie's life more permanently? Not as her nurse or as a friend of her mother, but as someone who helps raise her, someone who can pass on Catherine's values and keep her memory alive? Victoria's eyes widened. Andrew, I'm not asking you to replace Catherine, he said quickly. No one could, but you carry part of her forward. Sophie adores you, and honestly, so do I. You've brought light back into our lives when I thought we'd forgotten what that felt like. Victoria looked at Sophie, then at Andrew, then down at her hands. I'd be honored, she whispered. But you should know I'm still figuring out my own life. I'm not wealthy or successful. I'm just someone trying to find meaning again. That's exactly who we need, Andrew said gently. Someone real. Someone who understands loss. Someone who knew Catherine and can help us remember her properly. 6 months later, Victoria moved into the guest room of Andrew's house. Not as a romantic partner, but as family. She helped with Sophie's bedtime routine, told stories of Catherine, created space for grief and joy to coexist, slowly, carefully. They built something new from the broken pieces of before. 2 years after that, standing in the same park where Sophie had first approached her bench, Andrew proposed. Not to replace Catherine, but to honor the way life continues even after loss. Catherine would want this, he said, tears in his eyes. She'd want Sophie to have a mother figure who loved her. She'd want me to be happy again. And I think she'd be glad it was you, someone who saw her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. Victoria said yes. Not to erase the past, but to build a future that honored it. On their wedding day, they placed flowers on Catherine's grave. Sophie, now 7, read a poem she'd written about having 2 mothers, one in heaven and one on earth. Thank you for taking care of my family, Sophie said to the gravestone. Victoria tells me you would have liked each other. Victoria knelt beside the child, tears streaming down her face. I did like her. She was extraordinary. That night, holding Andrew's hand while Sophie slept peacefully down the hall, Victoria reflected on the strange paths life takes. She'd lost her purpose caring for the dying and found it again caring for the living. She'd honored one woman's memory by loving the family she left behind. Some connections transcend time and circumstance. Some love stories aren't about romance, but about recognizing kindred spirits and choosing to build something meaningful together. Catherine's legacy lived on, not just in photographs and memories, but in the way Victoria taught Sophie about courage, in the way Andrew learned to hope again, in the family they became through shared grief and unexpected grace. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales about the unexpected ways love endures. Comment below about someone whose memory you carry forward with honor. Every act of remembrance matters.